So you're very nearly there then. You've done so much hard work in terms of writing and then drafting your essay, and your main body argument should be pretty clear now. And so you are in a good place to be able to write your conclusion. And this presentation is to hopefully help you think about how to really make that a very powerful end to your essay. I've waited a long time before speaking to you about conclusions, because really you can't write a good conclusion to an essay unless your argument is fully formed. You don't know what you're concluding whilst you're still drafting. So that's kind of why we've left it. So I'm starting off with this kind of statement. And, is this true or is this false? What role does a conclusion play in your essay? Well, yes, it does in a way sum up. And certainly for GCSE, a good conclusion would do this. It would just reiterate, restate, reinforce what you've already spoken about. And that can still stand for A-level, and that would give us a clear and relevant conclusion. Your argument thread would be very clear all the way through, and you've maintained it to the very end. However, that's kind of band 3 level, so what I'm hoping to do now is to show you a good conclusion, this band 3 clear and relevant conclusion, and then look at the step up to move you to band 4 and band 5, so your conclusion is powerful and is going to be awarded additional marks as opposed to just finishing off your essay. And why I'm kind of keen for you to be able to move on from this band 3 clear and relevant to something slightly more thoughtful and thought-provoking is really summed up in this picture. A band 3 conclusion sums up essentially your main points. You're just adding another paragraph, but you're not adding any more ideas. It seems strange to say add ideas with your conclusion. I don't quite mean that, but hopefully when I show you the conclusions it will make sense. What I do mean though is that you make your thinking very clear, so you're showing the wrestling of your thinking in your conclusion until you reach that final idea. So here is a very clear, very relevant conclusion to an essay, and this is a great model, and if we can all produce something like this, then fabulous, and so be it. It is something though that would kind of suggest that if the rest of the essay was like this, it would be a really very clear, very confident band 3 essay. So we've got the title looking at exploring the significance of the presentation of conflict in the novel. So here it begins with an opening sentence. We've got that discourse marker in conclusion to say, look, I'm wrapping things up now. It then links in with the keywords from the title. I've been considering conflict, I've been looking at it through a Marxist lens, so again I'm very focused on my question, and I'm drawing a main conclusion. Actually, by showing conflict, the reader is understanding the damaging effects of capitalism, and that's what I've talked about in your essay. The next 2 sentences I've highlighted in red and purple. Again, this is this clear and relevant and restating things that I've already spoken about. So this has been shown through, and I've presented this in a paragraph, and this has also been highlighted in the war sections, and I've shown this in another paragraph. So this is a conclusion which is effectively summarising what has already been said. And then it ends, again, with a great discourse marker, ultimately, so I'm drawing everything to a final close. This is what I think I understand. Capitalism leads to conflict between others, but also individuals with themselves. All of this is very clear, all of this is very relevant, it creates that thread of the argument through, but I know, having read the rest of the essay, that it's not really moving anything on, it's just reminding me as a marker. I've talked about the damaging effects of capitalism, I've talked about the struggle, I've talked about soldiers in conflict with others and themselves, so it's not moving it on. So let's have a look at what we could potentially do differently, and I'm going to show you a different example to talk through this. What I'm going to talk to you about here is true for your NEA conclusion, but it is also true for conclusions for exam essays as well. So again, any lessons or any ideas you take away from this, don't just keep within the confines of your NEA, take it to your other texts and your other pieces of writing as well. So really a top band conclusion, those that are kind of working at the top of band 4 and into band 5, show you wrestling with the debate of the questions. Again, I'll show you an example of this. It reflects your thinking process through the essay. Not just that I've shown you this, this, this and this, but I saw this, but then you could see it in this way and you could see it like that. So it really shows that process that you've gone through. And then when we come towards the end of the essay and that kind of ultimately section, I am always taught to students that I would like you to take a step back from the text. What I mean by that is that obviously the novel that you're reading, any text that you're reading, is a fictional creation. And the writer isn't wanting us to read, for example, Birdsong and think, okay, that's what I've learnt about the world in Birdsong, but it stays in that text and it stays within the confines of that text. Really, what any writer is doing with a text is creating a fictional world, but wanting its reader to be able to see, actually, well, in that fictional world, this is how it is relevant to me in the real world. These are the ideas in the fictional world. However, those ideas in this very small created world are saying these things about my world. And that's the step back. We can go beyond the text and see the text as a vehicle for much bigger ideas than what simply happens to Jack, or what happens to Stephen, or what happens to Rhea. So when you are coming together to write your conclusion, have a read through your whole essay and be very clear what your arguments are. It might be that you read through and bullet point by, kind of on a separate piece of paper, this is what I'm really thinking, or this is what I thought, but then I also thought you could see this and you could see this. So we've got that flow of your thinking being presented. Once you've got those key ideas on a piece of paper in front of you, take a step back. What is it that a reader, and remember you're being a certain type of reader now, so you're being a Marxist or a feminist, or you're looking at it from a narratology point of view or a value point of view. With that hat on, with that particular way of looking and thinking about the text, what is it that we are taking away? And beyond the world of the novel, what might folks, for a Marxist or a feminist or a value critic or a narratology critic, what might folks be actually saying about the world, the nature of life, about humanity? You need to do that thinking before then you start to write your essay. And I'll show you a model here of a conclusion that came in at a low band 5, ultimately the essay, and this is the conclusion to the piece. I'll talk you through it, so hopefully you can start to see this wrestling, this thinking through, this sort of showing where the thinking has changed and developed, but then also the ability to take a step back. So this is one of my students from last year, different text, but I don't think that matters because really it's the process that they're going through rather than what the content of what they're actually saying that's important for you. What I've marked out in red here, so pause the video, have a read of it through, and as you're reading it through, think about my colour coding. The red is where this writer is showing their thinking process. So ultimately, I started off by seeing this. However, then I saw this, and this really connects with my lens in this way. However, the true value should be this, but that can't be the case. So we've got this juggling of ideas. It's showing your marker that things aren't just as straightforward as this, this, and this, but actually there is this. However, there is also this, and this complicates the matter, or this challenges it, or this reinforces it. And that's kind of you showing you're really thinking through all of the ideas. All of the time as well, as you're reading through this example, you will see just how tightly focused they still are on the task, this idea of value, what value really means in the world of this novel. And then I've highlighted the last lines for you. This one ends with a therefore, but again, in light of all of the juggling and the wrestling of my thinking that I've been doing, therefore, this is what I ultimately think. Perhaps, I think that's quite a key word for a conclusion because we're still being tentative. Remember that Fawkes isn't writing, nor is Ishiguro in this example. They're not writing for the lens that you're looking at. Sebastian Fawkes isn't sitting there thinking, I'm writing a Marxist text here, or I'm writing a text to appeal to feminists, or I'm writing a text to be part of the literary canon, or I know these tips of narratology and I'm ticking off all of them. He's not thinking that. So I think sometimes that word perhaps is, quite a valuable one in a conclusion still, particularly with what you're doing. And this is the step back. Ishiguro is perhaps showing his readers, so again bringing it out from the characters in the novel to us, and then what Ishiguro is showing the readers about the society in which they're living in and the results of that way of thinking. So it's not a massively long sentence or massively long part of the conclusion, but we have got a candidate now who is able to say, look, I've debated all of this within the novel, and in thinking about all of this within the novel, this is what I think my writer is is suggesting, or this is what a reader could take from this novel about their own worlds and their own lives. There is also a final trick with writing a really top quality conclusion, but this idea is incredibly hard, and if it works for you and you can do it, brilliant. If you can't, don't worry, it won't massively affect your mark. It's just you're ending on a real piece of kind of flair, but to get it wrong would be worse than not doing it. So I'll talk you through it and you can decide whether you think this would work for you. Really amazing writers are often able to end their pieces, their conclusions, on an apposite quotation, a really apt quotation that sums up all of their thinking. And that quotation can either come from the novel itself, so here I've taken a section from Fawkes, and there might be something in there that I could use to say, well, ultimately Fawkes is trying to get the reader to consider this about their world. And it might be that I want to talk about understanding, for example, or silence, and I might steal those words to use in my final line of my conclusion. You could, however, have done some wider reading and listened to some podcasts or YouTube videos about Fawkes himself. And so the middle one here is a quotation that I've taken from Fawkes. And it might be that you can end on a quotation from him that sums up what you think he's really wanting his reader to take away. I particularly like this one, particularly for my people who are looking at the canon. If the only criteria of value is whether something lasts, then the whole of human life is a waste of time. So that idea about kind of transience and permanence, and that might be something that, if I was writing about value or human life, or indeed about kind of the canon and whether something is worthy or not, I might be able to use some of the ideas there. However, you might have done some wider reading either in the critical anthology or again from Googling or from the articles that I've sent you, and you might get something from the critical point of view that you've been working on. So here's a great a quotation from Karl Marx, and it might be that if I'm writing from a Marxist viewpoint in my final line, I might be able to weave in a quotation from Marx or part of this quotation from Marx, which would sum up what I think a reader might take away, a Marxist reader might take away from Fawkes' text. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you what this looks like in practice. So when you're ready and you flick over, read through, pause the video whilst you're reading it, and then I will talk about it. But again, I want to stress that this is a really hard thing to do. So if it doesn't work for you, don't worry, it's not a disaster, it won't stop you getting band 5. But if some of you are capable of, in some essays, being able to do this, particularly if you're thinking about going on into university to do literature, it would be an amazing thing to practice and play with now. So with this conclusion, the first block that I've highlighted in yellow is they're kind of summing up their answer to the question. So they're directly making sure they've addressed the question that they've been given. And then in red, I've presented that the two moments where they're introduced, they're kind of wrangling with that debate. So my thinking thought this, and it might not be valid that in this instance. However, when we look at this, we could agree to some extent. So you can see them really grappling with the debate and showing the marker where their thinking has taken them and what challenges they've faced along the way in terms of addressing this question. However, towards the end, the final sentence does that stepping back, and they step back by bringing in another writer to help them say what it is that they want to say. And so I've highlighted in yellow how they build up to the quotation, and in purple is the quotation that they've used. And they're ultimately saying, yes, the novel is doing this, but it is for a particular reason, and therefore this writer is needing a reader who can do both things. Accept this and still see value within that, and still see what a Marxist reader might take it. This is the nature of life, that we are blind to the ugly visage that society often presents to us. It links with ideas of false consciousness. So have a go at drafting that conclusion, send it to me, get it checked, I'll give it back to you with comments on, and then you'll have another kind of redraft of that conclusion before your final deadline. But I just want you to be aware of these criteria that I need you to get right for your final deadline. So again, take some time, read them through, maybe print off this slide and tick off when you know that you've done all of these things, because they're all kind of vital in terms of what the exam board expect in terms of being an academic writer. And we don't want to annoy them, we want to get these things right. So best of luck, Send me your first draft of your conclusion as soon as you're ready, and then I can get it back to you so you can do some redrafts in order to meet that very final deadline.